Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham Dhammam Sangham Namasami. So I'll be doing 2 readings today. The first one is from Friends on the Path, which are Dhamma reflections from Ajahn Sundara and Ajahn Candasiri. And the second one is Samana, which I guess I'm assuming is a autobiography of Longta Mahā. Friends on the Path is page 33. This is from Ajahn Candasiri, and the talk is entitled A Question of Balance. Every winter at our monasteries, 2 or 3 months are set aside as quiet retreat time, a time to focus more intensively on our inner work. The encouragement given during this time is towards cultivating a stiller, quieter space within the heart. For it is only through attention to this that we are able to observe all our skillful and less skillful habits, and to train the mind, making it into a good friend, a good servant, rather than an enemy that can lead us into all kinds of unhappiness. Emerging from such a period of retreat highlights a dilemma faced by many people, whether living as householders or in a monastic environment. The question it poses regards finding an appropriate balance between essential inner work, which requires periods of withdrawal and seclusion, and our relationship with the world, including the responsibilities we have within our respective communities, whether family or monastic Sangha, and towards the greater whole. If our attention and energies are directed only outwards towards our spiritual companions or towards society, it becomes clear sooner or later that even if we expend every ounce of energy right up until the last breath, there would still be more to do. The needs, the suffering of the world out there is endless. We can never make it all right. If we try, as many of us have to do before the penny finally drops, the result can be exhaustion, despair, and disillusionment. Eventually, we see that actually it's a question of balance. We need to find a way of balancing our inner work and our outer work, and we begin to appreciate a basic paradox, that in order to be truly generous, truly of service to others, we actually need to be completely self-centered. We need to be able to stay in touch with our own hearts, listening carefully to what they tell us, even while engaged in external activity or interaction. We need to remain attentive to our own needs and to really make sure that these are well taken care of, even if it means disappointing people, letting them down, not living up to the expectations that many of us have, or that we have of ourselves. This is not at all easy with the conditioning most of us have. Don't be selfish. There's a simile given by the Buddha of 2 acrobats. The master said to his pupil, "You watch out for me, and I will watch out for you. That way we'll show off our skills successfully and receive our reward." But the pupil contradicted him, "But that won't do it at all, master. You should look after yourself, and I'll look after myself. That is how we shall perform successfully." The Buddha then goes on to explain that, in a sense, it was a pupil who had got it right. Watching out for ourselves through the practice of mindfulness, really applying ourselves to cultivating the 4 foundations of mindfulness, benefits others. And being mindful in regards to others is a way of taking care of our own hearts. Furthermore, we can take care for others through patience, gentleness, and kindly consideration. This is also a way of protecting our own hearts. During his lifetime, the Buddha established the Fourfold Assembly. The footnote is the community of monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen established the Fourfold Assembly as a social structure that would facilitate the cultivation and maintenance of the qualities of mindfulness and consideration of others. However, whether we go forth as monks or nuns or live as householders, one thing is clear: it's likely to take time. This practice has to be developed and worked at over a lifetime. Usually, things don't just change and fall into place with the first glimmer of insight. We need to do the work of laying the foundation, using the tools and guidance that the Buddha presented. Even though these were presented over 2,500 years ago, they still work well, having been used over generations by men and women to shape their lives, to enable the ripening of the potential that each one of us has. It waits quietly in the heart for us to choose to make its cultivation the priority of our lives. And with Samana, I'll start just at the very beginning. My mother was a wonderfully patient and devoted woman. She told me that of all the 16 children she carried to birth, I was by far the most troublesome in the womb. I was either so still in her stomach that she thought I must have already died, or I was thrashing around so violently that she thought I must have been on the verge of death. The closer I came to birth, the worse those extremes became. Just before I was born, my mother and my father each had an auspicious dream. My father dreamed that he had received a very sharp knife, pointed at the tip with an elephant tusk handle and encased in a silver sheath. My father felt very pleased. My mother, on the other hand, dreamed that she had received a pair of gold earrings, which were so lovely that she couldn't resist the temptation to put them on and admire herself in the mirror. The more she looked, the more they impressed her. My grandfather interpreted these two dreams to mean that the course of my life would follow one of these two extremes. If I chose the way of evil, I would be the most feared criminal of my time. My character would be so fearsome that I was bound to end up being a crime boss of unprecedented daring and ferocity who never allowed himself to be captured alive and imprisoned, but would hide out in the jungle and fight the authorities to the death. At the other extreme, if I chose the way of virtue, my goodness would be unequaled. I'd be bound to ordain as a Buddhist monk and become a field of merit for the world. When I grew up, I noticed that all the older boys were getting married, so I thought that's what I wanted too. One day, an old fortune teller came to visit the house of my friend. In the course of conversation, my friend blurted out that he wanted to ordain as a monk. The old man looked a bit annoyed and then asked to see the boy's hand. "Let's take a look at the lines in your palm to see if you're really going to be a monk." "Oh, look at this. There's no way you'll ordain." "But I really want to ordain." "No way. You'll get married first." I suddenly got an itch to ask the old man about my fortune, since I was hoping to marry at that time. I had no intention to ordain. When I stuck my hand out, the old man grabbed it and exclaimed, "This is the guy that's going to ordain." "But I want to get married." "No way. Your ordination line is full. Before long, you'll be a monk." My face went flush because I wasn't intending to be a monk at all. I wanted to have a wife. It was strange, really. After that, whenever I thought of marrying a girl, some obstacle would arise to prevent it. I even had a narrow escape after I ordained, when a girl I had previously had a crush on came looking for me at the monastery, only to find that I had just moved to another place. If she'd caught me in time, who knows? While I was growing up, I had no particular desire to become a monk. It took me a while to focus my attention on it. When I was 20, I fell seriously ill, so ill that my parents were constantly sitting at my bedside. My physical symptoms were severe. At the same time, a decision on whether or not to ordain weighed heavily on my mind. I felt the Lord of Death closing in on me. My whole life seemed to be in the balance. My parents sat anxiously beside me, not daring to speak. My mother, who was usually very talkative, just sat there crying. Eventually, my father couldn't hold back his tears. They both thought I was going to die that night. Seeing my parents crying in despair, I made the solemn vow that I should recover from that illness. I would ordain as a Buddhist monk for their sake. As though in response to my intense resolve, my symptoms began to slowly fade. By dawn, they had disappeared completely. Instead of dying that night as expected, I made a full recovery. But following my recovery, the intensity of my resolve waned. My inner virtue kept reminding me that I had made a solemn promise to ordain, so why was I procrastinating? Several months of indecision passed, even though I kept acknowledging my failure to live up to my resolution. Why hadn't I ordained yet? I knew I had no choice but to ordain. I had to honor the agreement I made with the Lord of Death, my life in exchange for ordination. I willingly conceded that ordination was inevitable. I wasn't trying to avoid it, but I needed a catalyst. That catalyst came during a frank discussion with my mother. Both she and my father were pleading with me to ordain. Finally, their tears forced me to make the decision that marked my path in life. My father wanted me to ordain so badly that he began to cry. As soon as my father started crying, I was startled. My father's tears were no small matter. I reflected on my father's tears for 3 days before finalizing my decision. At the end of the third day, I approached my mother and announced my intention to ordain, adding the provision that I would be allowed the freedom to give up the robes whenever I felt inclined. I made it clear that I wouldn't ordain if I was forbidden to disrobe, but my mother was too clever. She said that if I wanted to disrobe immediately after the ordination ceremony, in front of all the people in attendance, she wouldn't object. She'd be satisfied to see me standing there in yellow robes. That was all she asked. Of course, who would be foolish enough to immediately disrobe right there in front of the preceptor with the whole village in attendance? My mother easily outsmarted me on that one. Soon after my ordination, I began reading the story of the Buddha's life, which immediately awakened a strong sense of faith in my heart. I was so moved by the Buddha's struggle to attain enlightenment that tears rolled down my cheeks as I read. Contemplating the scope of his attainment instilled in me a fervent desire to gain release from suffering. Toward that purpose, I decided to formally study the Buddha's teachings as a preparation for putting them into practice. With that aim in mind, I made a solemn vow to contemplate the third grade of Pali studies. As soon as I passed the third level Pali exams, I planned to follow the way of practice. I had no intention to study further or take exams for the higher levels. When I traveled to Chiang Mai to take my exams, by chance Venerable Ajahn arrived at Wat Chedi Long in Chiang Mai at the time I did. As soon as I learned that he was staying there, I was overwhelmed with joy. When I returned from my alms round next morning, I learned from another monk that Ajahn Mun left for alms on a certain path and returned by this very same path. This made me even more eager to see him. Even if I couldn't meet him face to face, I'd be content just to have a glimpse of him before he left. The next morning, before Ajahn Mun went on alms round, I hurried out early for alms and then returned to my quarters. From there, I kept watch on the path by which he would return, and before long I saw him coming. With a longing that came from having wanted to see him for such a long time, I peeked out from my hiding place to catch a glimpse of him. The moment I saw him, a feeling of complete faith arose within me. I felt that because I had now seen an Arahant, I hadn't wasted my birth as a human being. Although no one had told me that he was an Arahant, my heart became firmly convinced of it the moment I saw him. At the same time, a feeling of sudden elation, hard to describe, came over me, making my hair stand on end. When I had passed my Pali exams, I returned to Bangkok with the intention of heading out to the countryside to practice meditation in line with my vow. But when I reached Bangkok, The senior monk who was my teacher insisted that I stay on. He was keenly interested to see me further my Pali studies. I tried to find some way to slip away because I felt that the conditions of my vow had been met the moment I had passed my Pali exams. Under no circumstances would I study for or take the next level of Pali exams. It's my temperament to value truthfulness. Once I've made a vow, I won't break it. Even life I don't value as much as a vow. So now I had to find some way to go out to practice. By a fortunate turn of events, that senior monk was suddenly invited out to the provinces, which gave me a chance to leave Bangkok while he was away. Had he been there, it would have been hard for me to get away, because I was indebted to him in many ways and probably would have felt such deference for him that I would have had difficulty leaving. But as soon as I saw my chance, I decided to make a vow that night, asking for an oven from the Dhamma to reinforce my determination to leave. After finishing my chants, I made my vow, the gist of which was that if my going out to meditate in line with my earlier vow would go smoothly and fulfill my aspirations, I wanted an unusual vision to appear to me, either in my meditation or in a dream. But if I'd be denied the chance to practice, or if having gone out I'd meet with disappointment, I asked that the vision show the reason why I'd be disappointed. On the other hand, if my departure was to fulfill my aspirations, I asked that the vision be extraordinarily strange and amazing. With that, I sat down to meditate. With no visions appearing during the long period I sat meditating, I stopped to rest. As soon as I fell asleep, however, I dreamed that I was floating effortlessly above a vast celestial metropolis. Stretching beneath me as far as the eye could see was an extremely impressive sight. All the houses looked like royal palaces, shining brightly as they glittered in the sunlight, as though made of solid gold. I floated 3 times around the metropolis and then returned to Earth. As soon as I returned to Earth, I woke up. It was 4 o'clock in the morning. I quickly got up with a feeling of fullness and contentment in my heart, because while I floated around the metropolis, my eyes were dazzled by many strange and amazing sights. I felt happy and very pleased with my vision. I thought that my hopes were sure to be fulfilled. I had never before seen such an amazing vision, and one that coincided so nicely with my vow. I really marveled at my vision that night. Early the next morning, I went to take leave of the senior monk in charge of the monastery, who willingly gave me permission to go. From the very start of my practice, I was very earnest and committed, because that's the sort of person I am. I don't play around. When I take a stance, that's how it has to be. When I set out to practice, I had only one book, the Patimokkha, in my shoulder bag. Now, I'd strive for the full path and the full results. I planned to give it my all, to give it my life. I wasn't going to hope for anything short of freedom from suffering. I felt sure that I would attain the release in this lifetime. All I asked was that someone show me that the paths, the fruitions in Nibbana were still attainable. I would give my life to that person and to the Dhamma without holding anything back. If it meant death, I died practicing meditation. I wouldn't die in a noble retreat. My heart was set like a stone post.
Have Luang Por ever tudong in Chiang Mai or been to Wat Jedi Luang?
I've never been to Wat Jedi Luang, not that I know of. But, I might have gone when I was a layperson wandering around Chiang Mai, but didn't really. Buddhism and religion wasn't quite on my mind at that point.
Oh, you mean before you ordained?
Yeah.
But you never do any tudong?
Well, Chiang Mai was up in Ampere Phan.
So the trip that Luang Por went to Doi Ang Kham.
Yeah, Doi Ang Kham was in Ampere Phan. So that was a tudong up there. I did go to. I was a monk. I went and visited Lumpur Sim's monastery.
Yep, that have to like go up to stair like 300, 400 steps.
Yeah, it's quite a ways up. Yeah, the cave there, quite spectacular.
Yes, the cave is pretty good. I really enjoy it.
Then, of course, also Lumpur Blian's monastery. But that wasn't too long. I mean, it was just going to visit. And also Lumpur Wan's monastery.
The trip that Luang Por took, the whole group, okay.
Yeah. I went to Lumpur Blian's monastery a couple of times because I've known him for a long time.
Luang Por.
Blian.
Oh,
Lumpur Blian.
From the first reading, I appreciated the kind of that spin on being completely self-centered. I think that's what you have to do.
Yeah. Well, it's just, learning how to look after yourself properly doesn't sort of preclude being a benefit to others. But when you actually learn how to look after yourself, then you actually have a better perspective on how to actually be, how to help others, how to be a benefit to others. So it's an interesting, again, like a spin on, because normally we use the word self-centered as a certain narcissistic, sociopathic sense, but when one is, say, truly self-centered with wisdom, then one actually steps beyond those limitations of self. Huh? We understand the limitations limitations of the mind, limitations of our perspectives, our views, our opinions, our own attachments and desires. It's also like with Lungta Mahā, just sort of listening to a story of, because when he established the monastery, then his mother came to live at the monastery. This is an old story in many of the forest monks' lives or their biographies. Like Lungpa Cha, many of the forest monks. But and then I think one of his sisters came and to stay at Banta. And I'm trying to remember. I don't remember clearly whether it was probably his sister came, and she had been practicing diligently and putting forth a lot of effort, and came to sort of announce, or to announce or let Ajahn Mahā know that she had sort of full realization, and Lungta Mahā's response, "That's about time." It's not your sort of warm and fuzzy.
From the pictures in this as well, it seems like there's that aspect of it, but then there's just like this smile in his pictures, and just like this incredible warmth.
Yeah, and he was a human being, and he had, as a human being, you have complexities, so that he was very kind of fierce. He was very, demanding, but he was also, so much of that just came out of compassion, in the sense of, don't waste your time. Don't lose this opportunity. And so to have this tremendous both ferocity, but then also tremendous concern for his fellow human beings.